listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast is one of my friends from social media who I invited to be on the podcast to share her story as a transgender Latter-day Saint. Welcome to the podcast, Rebecca. We're going to call you Becca Moore.
Please. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Becca is not difficult, but her journey and to be in the church is difficult. And so if you don't want to hear how difficult it is for a transgender Latter-day Saint to be a Latter-day Saint and feel welcome in our congregations, this isn't the episode for you. But if you, as part of your discipleship, want to hear a story and then consider what you can do to better support transgender Latter-day Saints and mourn, bear, and comfort, we invite you to stay engaged in this podcast as part of our discipleship. This is a painful story, and this is a place where we honor people's pain, even if the pain comes from church attendance or church policy or church doctrine. And when we know better, we do better. But Becca is just a remarkable woman. She's a transgender female, so she's going to tell her story with long-term gender dysphoria. As long as she can remember, she wanted to be a woman. She lives in Las Vegas. She has a career in banking. She's in her early 60s. She's a mother of 4, a grandmother of 9. She's had a wonderful career and continues to have a career in banking. She served a mission. And I'm using she pronouns, listeners, even though if we went way back then, she was elder. That's just the way I navigate. She served a wonderful mission in South Korea. In the Seoul West Mission. She grew up in Sandy, went to Brighton High School. We're not too far apart in age. I'm 65. She graduated from BYU, still has a testimony of the church, but the church has become so hard for her and so unwelcoming and so othering and feeling like a second-class citizen that she is not attending church right now. And she's alive. And she's a remarkable woman who is walking this incredibly difficult road. So we said a prayer together that this podcast will be helpful for you, but you have to know how grateful I am for Becca for willing to share her story and her courage to be authentic and live her life in congruity with how she feels. And I just pray for better days to better support our transgender friends. Is that okay for an introduction, Becca?
That's wonderful. I want to be clear though. There are some wonderful members who are very supportive, like you are, and those who have been very, very kind to me and accepted me.
Good.
Unfortunately, there are probably fewer than they could be, which is it's sad for me. But there's so many misconceptions out there about trans people still. For instance, they still think it's a choice that we have made, and it's not. And my I guess activism, as much as I can do, is to put truths out there, and I'll get into why later. But that's what's important to me. But I do want to talk about the experiences that have happened to me, especially since the new restrictions on transgender members came out in 2024. When that happened, it was dismaying to many of us transgender members in the church, because before that, the church had been moving in a direction where they were very supportive in terms of trying to help us be as active and participant as we can, and taking the advice of professionals in the medical and therapeutic community as to how they could best work with us within the church structure. And I think there was a lot of good intent there. The 2024 restrictions seem to be a 180 from that. Instead of listening to those professionals, it seems to be a knee-jerk reaction almost to the irrational fears of many people about transgender people, and the I guess the incorrect tropes that exist out there about us, and made rules around that. And that's what's concerning. Um, I know there's a lot of anxiety around us because at the same time this is happening, um, the whole world was coming down on us, really, and still is. Our government is entirely against us, and most of what they are putting out there is not the truth. And they're using lies as a precept to hurt us, and they have specific goals, and that's concerning. I don't want to get into the politics, but I want to set the stage. Because as transgender people, we looked at that, and we had one place of refuge, and one place that we thought would shield us from the evils of the world and support us. And when that entity turned around and joined in that same activity and attitude, it was devastating. Some of those rules backed off of the support they had given us before, and actually opened us up to abuse and humiliation. And I have experienced both of those, and that's the story that I want to share. Um, After my transition, I was determined to remain active. I've always had a testimony. I've always been active in the church, as you mentioned, Richard. I served a mission. I supported 2 children on a mission. I married in the temple. And all of my children have been married in the temple, and I'm very proud of that. Um, then came these well, this even before those restrictions, I am barred from having a temple recommend. My bishop, a wonderful man who has been very kind to me, came to my door, and I remember sitting in tears when he asked to take my temple recommend.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of a very difficult journey. Um, and it's not, from my viewpoint, I was born with gender dysphoria. This is not a sin. This is just who I am. So I am being asked to surrender that recommend because I am transgender. Shortly after that, I joined a secular choir who has rehearsals on Sunday afternoon. So it conflicted with my ward's time. So I went to another sacrament meeting in another ward, and was sitting with my eyes closed during the sacrament when I heard a woman shout out in the middle of the sacrament, "Kick him in the shins." And I opened my eyes up, and the deacon was there holding the bread for me. And she started throwing invective at me.
Wow.
I was beside myself. I stayed and took the rest of the sacrament, and then I got up and left under her glare. There was hatred there, and I really don't know why. Later than that, even I joined a 3-state choir for one of the Walk with Jesus programs that we did. It included my old ward that I had moved out of after my transition. I had been there for 20 years and counted all of the members that I knew there as friends. There were members of my ward in that choir. They wouldn't speak to me.
Wow.
They assiduously ignored me. And that caught me off guard too. What did I do to deserve that? I still don't know. I still don't know. Then the restrictions came out. I had worked with my leaders and an area authority to have permission to attend Relief Society. I was told I was no longer welcome after those restrictions. I I had contact with the church through ministering sisters who were good about visiting with me. They were immediately pulled. I've had no ministers for 2 years. Um, Again, still, I tried to stay active. Um, my breaking point came on a Sunday. I was sitting on the back row of the chapel with a very kind sister who always sat by me and visited with me and was very supportive. And there was a family in front of us. And when they realized who I was, they all got up en masse and went to the other side of the chapel and sat at a different bench.
Wow.
Like they couldn't be near somebody who was transgender. And I think that's the kind of atmosphere that has been germinated by those restrictions. And I'll get to the reason why in a moment. I have not been back to church since then, other than for a couple of occasions. The only contact I've received from my ward was a phone call from the elders asking for Brother Moore, which was a very deliberate misgendering because my name has been changed on the official records because I legally changed it. That was very hurtful. That was abuse, and they knew it. Um, Growing up, and I'm sure you've heard this, as we're not too far apart, we were told we would have it harder than our ancestors that crossed the plains coming to Salt Lake. I never understood how until now. Um, that's so true. It felt like the ground had shifted under my feet. The church had invited me to hope and then punished me for believing that hope was real. The two most egregious changes to the church's treatment of transgender members, to me and many of the others that I know, one is the record annotation system that they have in place. They annotated records of anybody who is involved in child abuse or sexual violence against children, or had a history of incest or predatory behavior, or who had embezzled church funds. That now includes transgender individuals. Again, not for anything that we've done, but for who we are. But what message does that send to other members of the church that we are to be feared as much as these people who have hurt children? Because of that, and the other restrictions that say that we cannot have a calling that has anything to do with children or youth. We can't exercise the priesthood. We don't have a temple recommend, and we can't attend gender-specific overnight activities. What that is telling all of the members is that we're dangerous and that we're to be feared. I don't think that the church purposely meant to do that, but that is the result of the restrictions that they put into place. The majority of the other transgender members that I know have either left the church entirely or do not attend. But to attend is to open ourselves to that humiliation and abuse and I will not voluntarily do that. And what hurts the very most is not the loss of the callings of the temple access. It is the impact it's had on my own family. I am not allowed to see my grandchildren. I'm told it's because their parents want to protect them. Policies don't stay on paper. They shape culture. They shape fear. I'm not asking anyone to change doctrine. I'm asking church leaders to understand that these restrictions have had disastrous, unintended consequences for transgender people. I have a son that lives here in Las Vegas as well. I have not been allowed to see my 3 grandchildren here for 3 years.
So sorry.
And it's not due to any legitimate reason. None of the things that are alleged in terms of or inferred due to these restrictions about our danger to children or fear have no basis in reality at all. None. There are no documented cases or instances of a transgender person hurting any child in the church. None. We know that there are several leaders and priesthood holders who have had that, but they're not treated that way. They're not feared. They're not restricted in the way that we are. And I don't think that's right. And I think it's due to a lack of understanding. Church leaders admitted at one point that they do not understand us and they do not know what to do with us. I don't think that they still do. And this is a very good example of that. That's kind of the message I wanted to get across. I thought maybe we could go into a discussion about some of the other things. I do want to state that I try to advocate for transgender children as well. I am distraught that there are legislators who profess to want to protect children from the treatments that will help them address their dysphoria. Again, there's no basis for that. These treatments are safe and effective and have been in use for decades. So they're not protecting children, they're actually hurting them. In states where these laws have been passed to prevent them from having access to these treatments, suicidality has increased dramatically, along with stress and anxiety for these children. Many of them have had to leave the state. Most people aren't aware that there has been a mass migration that is unprecedented in the history of the United States for people to leave those states where they can't get care to move to states where they can. That's shameful in this nation. And the truth, again, needs to be boldly stated. that this is not right. So I would love to have a more in-depth conversation with you. Any questions that you may have?
Well, if you were in my home, I'd just give you a big hug, Becca, for being alive and all the pain you've endured, and where we are as a country and as a church. And so many of my trans friends have died by suicide because of the things you talk about, and there's no safe place. I'm just heartbroken. I'm a member of the church, active member of the church. I'm aware of the August 2023 statements that changed your life. I think most members aren't. Church didn't have a press release and say we're putting these restrictions in the handbook and this is why. It just happened, and I would guess 90% of the members don't even know they're there, but you know they're there, and your local leaders know they're there, and there's no explanation for why. You learned about them not through a visit explaining them, but just through probably social media, letting you know that somebody found these and here they are, and you're reading that for the first time and thinking, I have been given permission to go to Release Society by my local leaders. That has just been taken off the table church-wide. They have no choice now. And the callings, and just the things you were able to do. And then it sort of gives license for members to treat you. The policy statements don't say don't sit by someone that's trans, but they do. When the content there is, it creates a feeling you're a second-class citizen and not safe. And I would be gaslighting you if I told you you're overthinking that, or our leaders really love you, or anything. Listeners, I just have to sit with Becca and acknowledge her pain. I'm a cis straight guy. I don't feel any of that pain. Part of my discipleship is to honor people's pain and to recognize that pain and not dismiss it with somebody else's possible good intentions or why. So my first feeling is just, I'm so sorry. And it's not fair, and I'm not supportive of it. And it just causes a lot of needless pain. My thought on the whole thing is, we've been doing these episodes with Greg Prince, 3 episodes really talking about gay and lesbian and where the church has been. And he talks about episode 1 going from the behavior model to the biological model. When the church first started talking about gay men in the late 60s, it was behavior. This was a
Right.
choice and you could unchoose it. And the church is mostly, there's an occasional talk that sort of infers behavior. The church is mostly, this is biology. People come this way. And I think most of society and people accept that. But I feel like we're in 1969 or 65, where we're first starting to have proximity to trans people with long-term gender dysphoria. And we're clearly in the behavior model, Becca, where we're ignoring what science and doctors are saying. And we're saying this is behavior. You've been deceived. Whatever narrative we want to keep us safe, you've been deceived. That's what we used to say to people who were gay, is Satan's deceived them. They're straight. Something's happened and now they're gay. And if we can just figure out what that is, we can undo that and get back to a straight person. My feeling is you have long-term gender dysphoria. You could probably do a whole podcast on 40, 50 years of not feeling right in your body. And our medical community has diagnosed that. It's a recognized DSM. I'm not a physician, but it's a recognized diagnostic category. It's not a mental health issue. Being gay was a mental health thing that was treated as a mental health disorder, and this was at one point, and it's not. So our science community, you know this better than I do, is sort of following the science and recognizing this is biology. People really do have long-term gender dysphoria. And I'll keep going, but just jump in. Let's have you jump in with that first segment of my thoughts.
I think that obviously the church has its doctrine that it sticks to, and I certainly understand that. And they have a doctrine about gender. Gender is eternal. Being transgender is not inconsistent with that. My eternal spirit is female. there's when I came out, I had a lot of members telling me, God does not make mistakes. Tell that to a Down syndrome child, or tell that to somebody born without an arm, or tell that to somebody who is born with a terrible genetic disease. God, in my mind, doesn't interfere. That's an operation of free will. Things happen in the womb to make resulting in people being not born perfect. Gender is not exclusive of that. The body and the brain develop sexually at different times, and science has found that those can diverge, and that creates gender dysphoria in that person when they are born. And while science has found that out, we're still widely perceived as having a mental illness. And that is not true.
Well said. And I've loved some of my trans friends talking what you talk about, Becca, this really deep spiritual confirmation that their spirit is eternal and they've been born into a body that doesn't match their spirit. And they point to intersex people that are born into a body that has the physical characteristics. I'm not a scientist, of both men and women, and they're intersex. We've had some of those people on the podcast that have experienced gender dysphoria because of that. But they would also say that just because there's not an intersex condition, don't dismiss someone's gender dysphoria. We're kind of at the beginning of understanding why you feel this way. And so I am completely open in this world that your spirit is female and eternal, and you were born into a male biological body, and that created gender dysphoria. And as some listeners may know, the church kind of doubled down when Elder Oaks, not in conference, but in a leadership training, I believe, before a general conference, said, we define gender as sex at birth. So we kind of closed the door on your personal revelation. And that was uncomfortable for me because I've always felt I should let my transgender people help me understand this space. And listen to their lived experiences before I develop my own conclusions.
That's something that is very distressing when people talk about transgender policy or make transgender legislation. They don't involve transgender people at all. They're making decisions about our lives without any insight into who we are and the things that we go through. And that's not right.
And so that kind of leads to, I'm back to Greg Prince, taking us back to the 70s and 80s, and the wedge issue that Republican Party used to fight same-sex marriage and all the terrible things that would happen if same-sex marriage became legal. And those arguments, the reason same-sex marriage became legal is those arguments that people used to put forth. There was no empirical data that the courts could find. And so constitutionally, we agreed to same-sex marriage, and the church even agreed to support legal same-sex marriage in the United States with the Respect for Marriage Act in 2023, even sending a General Authority 70 to the White House for the signing. And so it took 32 years for the church to sort of recognize all the fear-based political arguments around same-sex marriage. There was no validity in that. It created a lot of fear. Greg Prince calls them wedge issues or fear-mongering issues that create fear and votes and community. Brene Brown calls it common enemy intimacy. If the bond we share is simply we hate the same people, the bond we experience is intense, gratifying, and an easy way to discharge our outrage and pain. It's not, however, fuel for real connection, end quote. And that really resonates for me. I've sat in church and bagged on in elders' quorum, people that left the church, people in other churches, gay and trans people, and it brought me common enemy intimacy. I felt really good, Becca, but it's not the model that Christ sent forth in his ministry. It's not what I read in the New Testament that a true disciple will use to follow Jesus. So we have to go to a higher, holier law. And then regarding trans people, so much of most people's opinions, in my opinion, are informed by political ideology, loud voices right now on the far right that are creating fear around trans people. And
And
it
that's very deliberate.
and it
Um,
works. They get a lot of
back
votes and a
in
lot of donations.
Oh yeah. My son, when I asked him, why won't you let me see my grandchildren? One of the things that he told me is that he doesn't want them exposed to, quote, gender ideology,
Mm.
quote. There's no such thing as gender ideology. It's something that the conservatives created in the 90s because they couldn't target gay people anymore. That had run its course. So they needed a new group to target. And they found a very small and defenseless one that they could do whatever they wanted to with impunity. And that's what we've seen. And in some degrees, it's been successful because, again, it's based on lies. Like the fact that there is no gender ideology.
And then the laws that are going around. I listened to Laura Lee Hall. You would know Laura Lee Hall. The former
Yes,
chief
we've met.
architect of the church, a transgender woman who left the church, ended her employment. If you drive by the Provo Temple or the Provo MTC, Laura Lee Hall, a transgender woman, designed those beautiful buildings. Many of the temples worked for the church, ultimately served as a stake president. She's been on the podcast, written a book, but I heard her speak at Gather, a one-day event down in Arizona, and one of the things she went through is some of the laws that are being placed and or passed. And one I'm reading about right now on my phone is what Kansas did is they invalidated all the driver's license of transgender people. And so
Overnight.
overnight, so all these people, I'm not sure the number, you may know it, Becca, are just following the law. They're transgender people. They got license in the gender of their, their identity, their true identity. That was legal in Kansas. And overnight, a Republican legislature sort of fear-mongering type thing said, we will do this. And this very small minority now has no legal driver's license. They have to go back and get a new license based on their sex at birth. And I don't know what we accomplished, except a lot of people feel better about themselves that we're marginalizing a really defenseless group. You're not creating
It
any
was
harm by driving around.
it
I
was
know of no
completely
data that
based on.
says our transgender people are worse or better drivers than cisgender people. But share your thoughts on that.
I won't try to validate that, but that legislation, as well as a lot of the other things that we're seeing against us, are completely based on animus. The conservatives who are in power right now hate transgender people. The the laws now that are being adjudicated, many of the judges are finding there is no rational basis for those laws. The only basis that they are seeing is animus from those political people who are in power. That's exactly what happened in Kansas. One good thing that happened in Kansas that you may be aware of is that a judge put a stay on
Oh, good.
the ban on gender affirming care for children. Uh, he looked at the witnesses on the anti-transgender side and found that they had no credibility at all in terms of talking about transgender people and gender dysphoria. But he did go through fact finding and found 493 specific facts which supported the need for gender affirming care for transgender children. So when people stop to look for the truth, they find it.
Um, just a heartbreaking space. Elder,
I
what?
often
Go ahead.
refer to us as the least of these, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but we're 1% of the population. The things that we're being accused of in terms of sports and women's spaces, the events happening there are minuscule on a population scale. W- we can't make a huge dent on any of those things because there are not that many of us.
I think of some of you that have listened to me in the past know that I like to talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan. My wife and I were on the road to Jericho, or looking over the road to Jericho. It's an 18-mile road, and I think we know that parable, that a Jewish priest, a Jewish man, was on that road and left for dead. And there were three people that walked by him. Christ is teaching this parable to Jews. And a Jewish priest walked by and didn't offer aid. A Levite didn't offer aid. And then a Samaritan, which in the Jewish eyes was the least of these, the most villainized, the most whatever group of people in the Jewish eyes, offered to help the Jewish man. And that would be shocking for Christ to teach that parable to the Jewish people around him. And it elevated the Good Samaritan to a place that I just think of my transgender friends as the Samaritans. And that they're capable, like Rebecca and often do, superior moral behavior. They're Christ-like, they're kind, they're more perceptive of other people on the margins, other LGBTQ people, undocumented workers, people that have been also sort of dehumanized or targeted. And they're some of the finest people I know that are exhibiting some of the superior moral behavior. But I think Christ put those parables to help us apply. They're timeless, and they applied it to today. And, I just invite us. What I wish I had done is never develop feelings or opinions about trans people until I listened to a lot of trans people. I had a lot of inaccurate information because I was listening to loud political voices, and it made me feel good. And I kind of liked having another group to kind of villainize. But, the trap of unearned opinions is what I call it. It's easier for me to have it's harder for me to have no opinions versus an uninformed opinion. But the best thing is what Brene Brown does and what Christ taught is people are hard to hate, close up, move in, and get to know trans people and ignore the loud voices telling us how to feel. Thoughts on that, Becca?
When people encounter trans people and know them, and this has been true in my experience, they most of the conceptions that they had beforehand are shattered. I joined a pool league, and most of the people in there are very MAGA, and they were very, I guess, wary of us coming in and playing pool. There were a couple of us that joined, and some of those people have become very loving towards us and very protective of us, and it's been incredible to see that turnaround. If people had the opportunity to meet us and get to know us, they would realize that we are not demons. We are not there to hurt anyone. We are regular people, just like anybody else. I changed my outward appearance. I biologically changed who I am. My soul is the same. My beliefs are the same. There's a consistency there that people don't realize, and that carries through. We are just regular people.
We are just regular people.
Better now because we have aligned our bodies to our gender identity and reduce that gender dysphoria, and that makes us happier. There is a great campaign going on against gender affirming care right now, and again, that's based on animus. They want to get rid of transgender people. There are people out there whose goal is to be rid of us. 98% of people who have gone through a gender transition are satisfied or happy with it. It works. It's a medical treatment for a medical condition.
My advice, I'm not being just an ally. When I wrote my first book, Listen, Learn, and Love, Embracing LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, this is about 6 years ago. I did write a chapter on transgender Latter-day Saints because it's sometimes your story just gets lumped in with gay and lesbian stories, and it's a completely different. It's gender identity versus sexual orientation. And I wanted to talk about that, but my advice in that chapter, which would still be my advice, is if you feel gender dysphoria, go slow. Um, you just do this very thoughtful. If you're a youth, I'm going to separate this discussion in youth. I don't like the laws that take it out of the hands of the parents to make decisions for their kids' medical care. That said, I like the idea generally of youth going slow with gender affirming care, especially top and bottom surgery. But I have had enough experience with youth going through the medical things, going from a suicidal, hopeless youth to a youth that's thriving. And those parents, LDS parents, have told me those stories. And I'm very uncomfortable with parents, LDS parents, non LDS parents, not having the legal right to provide the care that, in their opinion and the doctor's opinion, is the best care for their child. Now, an adult, obviously, there's not legislation preventing you from getting gender affirming care, but so that's how I feel about
Not
that.
yet.
Not yet,
Somebody
true.
proposed it in Louisiana, and it was
Well, there
voted
you go.
down. But it's
And
starting.
and so, I just look at it as a broken knee or a torn rotator cuff. I know that journey a little bit, and those are understood medical conditions that are DSMs that we have a set of procedures to deal with that. And I'm also uncomfortable. There are some people that detransition. That's somebody who's transitioned that detransitions. And in that book, I wrote about that. That's a possibility. But I think, and those stories are valid. And sometimes those stories involve care that was inappropriate or too aggressive, or perhaps even a physician that had an agenda. But where I'm uncomfortable is those people coming into legislative meetings and invalidating all the stories of Becca and saying this is completely a crock. I'm paraphrasing what they might say. I'm an example of someone that's detransitioned and this was wrong and it harmed me, and that may be all valid, but then weaponizing that story against every other person with gender dysphoria, and that certainly feels good to maybe a political body, but it's not helpful there. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
They thrive on the notoriety. I have encountered and discussed things with them on social media. The vast majority of detransitioners will retransition. The reasons that they detransition are financial, pressure from family, or the pressure from society to conform. Those things are very, very difficult to go through. But because of the dysphoria, they go back and continue to transition. There are very few who officially detransition. One of those detransitioners, even that I know of, that goes and testifies to take care away from children and make them suffer, they have admitted to still having gender dysphoria and still struggling with that. I don't understand how they can hurt children the way that they do, knowing their own experience and knowing the suffering that they have gone through and that they want to inflict on those children.
It's just heartbreaking, and it's sad, and it's not part. It's just now. I will share this, and Becca may or may not disagree with me. Transgender women, and this is a minority. I think these cases are so rare. There's this big dialogue about sports, and the fear of transgender women like Becca coming and playing in women's sports, a biological male transgender woman having some sort of edge. And I will agree on principle that there is a legitimate I like the principle of fairness, and perhaps there is an unfairness created in that space with a transgender woman competing in women's sports that's unfair. And I'm more nuanced than any other issue we've talked about so far, because that could affect somebody else. And nothing we've talked to affects anybody else. It's just someone with gender dysphoria trying to find hope and healing. Any thoughts on that, Becca?
My heart breaks for transgender athletes. When the law passed in Utah, there was only one trans girl playing in sports. And I believe it was in middle school or high school. And she just wanted to play with her friends. And there was, again, no danger or imminent harm to anybody other than the animus that is prevalent there to pass that law. When the NCAA changed their rules based on pressure from this administration, they were asked, how many transgender athletes are there in the NCAA? They said there are a total of, I think, 500,000, well, maybe it's 50,000 athletes. It's a huge number. Do you know how many transgender athletes there are?
I don't.
10.
Wow.
The other misconception there is the people who are fighting against our participation in sports say there's no place for biological males. Anybody who has gone through a gender transition is no longer biologically male.
I love that.
Hormones institute many changes in the body. Muscle mass is reduced. It changes protein structures in the blood. It changes gene expression. We're just discovering some of the things that happen, but their bodies are not male anymore. So what that does is we have to look at them in the breadth of the women that are out there. There are natural variations in all women. I've just been splashed on Instagram with, there's some like 7'5" tall women out there who play on volleyball teams. There are no 7'5" transgender women out there. That now that they have transitioned, they fall in the natural variation of all women. And you're going to have women who are much more capable and athletically talented than a trans woman. One of the most famous cases that we know of is Leah Thomas, who was a swimmer. She's famous for tying with somebody for 5th place, which tells you that there were 4 athletes who were better than her in that race. So my contention is that it is just plain discrimination.
I learned something from you. I've changed my opinion about this. So thank you. I learn things on these podcasts. Becca just helped me understand that she didn't say it though, she's too gracious, but she sort of inferred that I shouldn't look at a transgender woman as a biological male. I should look at someone who's gone through the transition as biologically female because of the impact of hormones and all the work they've done, and not sort of go down the road I went. So I learned something. Thank you, Becca.
See, you learn so much by knowing a transgender person.
There you go. Um, I'd like to read. This actually has become a triggering quote for my transgender friends. I put it in my first book. It's Elder Rasband at a face to face talking. He's a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles,
Yes, he
and
was our
he
area authority for a while.
and there you go. And this, he said regarding transgender, quote, need to be encircled in the arms of their Savior and know they are loved. So often the Lord calls on us. He expects us to be his welcoming, loving arms. We need to encourage their friends to do the same. So this was asked, how we should treat people with transgender feelings. And sometimes when I share that, my transgender friends was that's kind of painful because my experience doesn't match that at all. And the he said this before the policy statements that Becca's talked about of 2024 or 2023, I think 20. This was said before them. So the policy doesn't match Elder Rasband's comments, and we
Not
haven't
at all.
we haven't used his statement in a conference talk or in any way. Talk about that, his statement and what the matched reality that you're feeling in your local ward.
Oh, we obviously welcomed that statement because, again, we're no different in terms of we're just people. And I'm just another member of the church. I have just changed my gender. The the problem with the restrictions is that they tacitly open up the again opportunity for humiliation and abuse. They no longer they say we're not going to tell members that they have to use your pronouns. We're going to leave it up to the families. And so I have elders calling me and misgendering me just to be mean. Um, I, again, people just don't know, but these restrictions have caused much more harm and heartache and humiliation and abuse than they have helped anybody. I I finally called my ward's elders quorum president and said, because I know I had ministering teachers assigned to me. I had not seen them for 2 years. I said, is there somebody willing to come and visit me, because I would like to have some contact with the church? And they were kind enough to come over. And the president asked if he could leave me with a prayer. And he did. And in that prayer, he prayed that I would have an eternal perspective on things. And while I appreciate his intent, that showed me that he doesn't have any idea of what it means to be transgender. I absolutely have an eternal perspective on things. It's probably very different than his.
Mhm. And this is where I wish the church led. I wish the church, developed a whole conference talk around Elder Rasband's quote and led and told members how to feel about trans people. And this is where I have complicated relationship with the institutional church, because these social issues kind of perk up, and loud political voices, their ideology informs members how to feel. And then, that happened with gay and lesbian people. And this is a chance for our church leaders to lead, and just we should be, because of our theology and our teachings about Christ and our desire to help everybody feel welcome, we could and we should lead as the restored church on how to treat all of God's children and
I
all.
absolutely agree. I will go a step further and say the church has been proactive in things that they believe are truth, and when legislation comes out that they disagree with, they will make their opinion known. When all of these terrible laws have been put in place in Utah, out of animus, to oppress transgender people, the church said nothing. And that was, to me, severely disappointing because this is an injustice. I wish the church would stand up and defend us rather than joining with those who oppress us. And that's what we have seen. That's our perception.
I love the line, do what is right, let the consequence follow. And I think that's part of leading. And I have holy envy for the Pope leading on a number of issues. I'm not sure he's the only thing I'm aware the Pope has done with transgender Catholics is had a meeting where he just invited a bunch of transgender Catholics to sit at a table with him and tell them about their experience. And I thought that was pretty cool, just to role model table fellowship. And here's the leader of the Catholic Church inviting Catholic transgender members to visit with him. Do you remember that, Becca? Are you aware of that?
I am, and I know that he is progressive, and he's got a very large institution that he's going to have to try to steer around that. So I understand taking it slow. I wish we as transgender people had an opportunity to have an audience with church leaders so that they said they don't understand us. I don't know if it's true or not, but I have heard that the leadership's expert on transgender issues is a BYU biology professor. Again, that's hearsay, but it just goes to show they have not talked to us about who we are and what we need. And they said, if they don't understand us, talk to us, invite us to sit down with them. I think it would make a world of change. And they do not understand what they have done to us. I don't think it was intentional. I think is an unintended consequence. But it needs to be addressed because it's hurting us. And it's alienated me from my entire family. And that's not right.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, I would love, the church does these visits when a politician comes in town, an ambassador from a foreign country. We see those on the church social media pages. And I would love, it doesn't require a change in doctrine, but what a beautiful visual imagery if our church leaders were meeting with transgender Latter-day Saints and just said some kind comments about everybody's welcome at church, everybody needs to feel they belong. Elder Rasband's quote, and what that would do for you, Becca. You can't put this on a shelf and wait for more light and understanding. The cost of this is really painful for your family and your church, and there's things that we could do. What impact would that have on a ward council or a stake council or a family if they saw our leaders? Just like Christ did, he invited everybody to his table fellowship. I love, you kind of referred to this scripture, the least of these, I'm reading Matthew 25:40, when Christ asked, who is our neighbor? And the king answered unto them, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of me, least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. So you're not the least in God's eyes, in my opinion, Becca, but society has sort of made you the least.
Absolutely.
And so my baptism covenants require me to go to the furthest on the margins and do everything I can as an ally and help you feel belonging and inclusion. And that's what I hope, my hope for the future of our church and our congregations. But it's hard to do that if our leaders don't lead and create policies that directly make it harder for you and harm you. We've had a podcast guest talk about when church is hard. He wrote a book at Desert Book by that title, and he's a physician. He didn't talk about transgender people, but he talked about pain as a physician is his friend to understand what needs to be addressed. So when people come into a doc's office complaining about knee pain or back pain or whatever, we've learned that's really cool. The pain's painful, but it's really helpful for the medical profession to understand what needs to be addressed. And he takes that and said we do the same thing in our congregation. So when someone like Becca's opening up with pain, that is our friend to hopefully say, what do we need to address to be a more Zion-like people? The gathering of Israel includes Latter-day Saints that are trans and experience gender dysphoria. You're Israel. You've served a mission. You've done so much to help our church, and now we need to gather you and help you feel like you're welcome here, and we haven't done that. One of the stories that really helped me to understand this space was an old podcast where a mom has a transgender kid, and she compared it to car sickness. And she said he was just suffering. And we all understand car sickness. We want to get out of the car, and there's an end to that. And unless we live on Dramamine, I guess we could be permanently muted from car sickness. And now I can really relate. I can't relate to gender dysphoria. I can't relate to different sexual orientation than straight, but I can certainly relate to feeling car sick. And when I'm car sick, Becca, I want to do everything I can to get out of the car. And then she made the point that her kid can't get out of the car. There is no relief. And the transitioning things, the legal, social, and medical are the things that saved his life. And that really opened my eyes that there's something really real here that I need to understand, and the medical community generally does understand. So more comments as I'm sharing a little bit about my feelings. I want to make sure not to dominate this and get you talking.
Not at all. This is a great conversation.
And I'll share. Do you have anything else you'd like to share? I've got a couple more things I'd like to say, but I'd rather hear you first.
I will say this right now. I do think the church has an obligation to address this because primarily many of these restrictions have no basis in reality. And I will delve into that in my closing statement a little bit, but the church should never operate on something that is not true. So they need to address those things that are not and are based in falsehoods. And I think after that, they have an obligation to make it right, to go back to their stance where they want to, as Elder Rasband said, embrace us and love us and make us a part of the church rather than make us pariahs, which is what we are now. And that's never right.
Well, I just have two more closing thoughts, and then let's have your closing statement. We've talked about Levi Martin, an intersex young man who died by suicide. And his family's careful not to say his story is more valid than your story. His parents have been on the podcast, terrific parents, really trying to support transgender people. But they allowed me to read his note that he died by suicide. And part of that note was this quote, "I will never forget." As he was aging into adulthood, that was difficult for him. He was turning 18, I believe. And he said in this suicide note, quote, "I'm terrified of how society treats trans people," end quote. And you know this, Becca, and you've maybe felt so much suicidal ideation yourself. And that is just heartbreaking to me that somebody feels that way. And it's so inconsistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
When your church and society and your family reject you for who you are, how much lower can you feel and go?
And you felt all that. Levi still died by suicide. He had supportive parents. He didn't have a supportive faith congregation. He had friends in his congregation that were very kind and some leaders, but the church as a whole was difficult for Levi, as you know. And I'm remembering seeing the movie Harriet in 2019 with my wife. It's a movie about slavery and Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad and the slave owners that fought against that. And I thought to myself, where would I have been on that issue if I had been a product of that time and all the dehumanizing narrative that we set around black slaves and really dehumanized them to the point that we felt justified, or even read scriptures in the Bible that justified slavery. And I felt pretty uncomfortable in that movie, wondering where I would have been. It's easy to see where I would be now because I understand what was right and wrong and can take my lens of slavery's evil and black people are equal to me and take that back. But where would I have been then? I don't know, to be honest. And then I thought of my trans friends as I walked out of the movie, and I thought, where are we going to? I just wanted to be, I didn't want to be the slave owner. I didn't want to be the person that's dehumanizing trans people in our day. I wanted to use the gospel of Jesus Christ and all the examples in the scriptures, the Canaanite woman that the apostles were shooing away, and Christ, was with the Canaanite woman, this woman that was deemed unworthy because she was Canaanite. All these examples, to me, should be used to help us out of love and support somebody like Becca. And you are a neighbor, you are a friend, and I love you, Becca. And I'm so sorry for the difficult road you walk, and I admire your courage to be on the podcast and be alive, and I just pray for better days. But it's brave people like you that share your story that make it better days possible, and allies of doing the best we can to better support you. But just share your closing comments, your closing thoughts for our listeners.
You bet. I want to end with this. I am not a danger to children. I am not somebody that you need to protect anybody from. I'm a parent. I'm a grandparent. I'm a disciple of Christ and a woman who has spent her life trying to do good. If my own family is afraid of me now, it's not because of who I am. It's because of what they've been taught to fear. Years ago, I used to listen to a podcast called Mormon Myths, if you're familiar with that. Their whole purpose was to debunk false narratives in church history. Many of you have probably been to the church in Pine Valley, which was rumored to be built as an upside down ship. That's a complete myth. Somebody sat down with one of the historians once and asked them, why do you do this? Why are you shattering all of these stories? Her answer has always stayed with me and has echoed with me ever since, especially after these things came out. Her answer was, the Holy Ghost cannot testify to a lie. I believe the same principle applies here. Fear is not of the Spirit. Suspicion is not of the Spirit. Those things should not be part of church policy, and that's what they have created. The idea that transgender people are inherently dangerous, especially to children, is not true. It has absolutely no basis in reality. And that's something that the Holy Ghost could never attest to. If you have concerns about transgender people, you pray and ask the Lord about it and see what your answer is. I'm hoping that by sharing my story, someone will hear us pause, take a breath, and choose compassion over fear. I hope my children and others like them will someday see me again, not through a lens of policy, but through a lens of love. Do you mind if I address my children for a moment?
Please.
To my children, I know you're trying to protect your own children. I know you're acting out of love, out of caution, and what you believe is right. I do not blame you for that. But you need to hear this clearly. I have never been a danger to any child, not to you, not to your children, not to anyone. If you feel fear now, it is not because of anything I have done. It's because of what you have been taught to fear. I am still the Father who raised you, protected you, prayed for you, and loved you with my whole heart. I am still the grandparent who cherishes each one of your children. I'm still the same soul I have always been. I am asking you, gently, lovingly, to look at me with your own eyes, not through the lens of policy or fear. I am asking you to let the Spirit speak truth to your hearts. And the lie that transgender people are dangerous has shattered our family. I love you. I always have, and I always will.
Thank you, Becca Moore.
Thank you.
And thank you, our listeners, for joining us on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler.